In a small, dusty village, where the sun seemed to hang low in the sky like it was watching everything, life followed the old ways. The villagers believed in honor, tradition, and customs that had been passed down for generations. In this village, what people called family honor was stronger than anything else. Stronger than love. Stronger than kindness. And for a young bride named Lila, these customs were about to shape the most terrifying day of her life. Lila was only 17. With soft brown hair that shone in the morning sun, and eyes that were wide and curious, even though fear had clouded them lately. She had grown up helping her mother cook, cleaning the small home she shared with her family, and listening to stories about the old days when the village had been smaller, quieter, and people had treated each other with more care. But even in those stories, she had always sensed a shadow. A strictness that could turn gentle smiles into frowns, and playful laughter into sharp warnings. Her parents had arranged her marriage months ago. They had chosen a man from another village, someone they believed would protect the family's honor. But Lila had never met him, and the thought of spending her life with a stranger filled her with unease. Still, she had tried to be brave. She had told herself that she would follow the rules, obey her parents, and hope that everything would turn out okay. The morning of the wedding, however, was unlike any day she had ever experienced. A dark tension filled the air. Lila woke before the sun rose, her stomach twisting with worry. The house was silent except for the soft rustle of her mother's movements as she prepared the small breakfast. But there was no warmth in the kitchen. Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she placed bread and tea on the table. Even her father, a man of quiet authority, avoided looking directly at her. "They will come soon," her mother whispered, as if speaking too loudly could make the words dangerous. "You must be strong, Lila. This is for our family." Lila nodded, but the words made her chest tighten. Strong. She felt anything but strong. She felt like a fragile bird trapped in a cage, unsure if her wings could ever lift her. Her mind raced with questions. Why did honor mean fear? Why did traditions demand cruelty? She had heard whispers from the older women in the village about what sometimes happened to brides, but she had never imagined it could be her. By mid-morning, villagers had gathered in the center of the small square. Men stood with serious faces, their hands folded behind their backs. Women whispered to each other, glancing nervously at Lila. Children peeked from behind doors, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. Lila was led outside, her arms trembling as they were tied gently to a wooden post. It was not yet fire, she realized, but the ropes pressed against her wrists like cold steel, and she shivered. The villagers were preparing a ritual that had been done for generations, a ritual that no one questioned openly because fear of shame was stronger than fear of danger. Lila's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might be heard by everyone around her. The air smelled of dust, dry grass, and smoke from the fires that had been lit in preparation for the ceremony. She could hear faint murmurs, the voices of women speaking quietly, almost in apology, almost in prayer. She looked at her parents and caught her mother's gaze. There was love there, she realized, though it was mixed with worry and resignation. Her father's expression was harder, more distant, as if he were trying to convince himself that what was happening was necessary. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. She could not cry here, not in front of everyone. Tears, in this place, were weakness, and weakness could bring shame. The villagers started to arrange the wood, stacking it neatly near the post where Lila was tied. She noticed some of the younger men shifting uneasily, as if they were beginning to question the tradition. But no one dared speak. The silence was heavy, pressing down on her from all sides. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. In the distance, she heard a sound she did not expect, a faint, stumbling voice, followed by the jingling of metal, maybe coins or tools, as someone approached. Lila's head turned slightly, but she could not make out who it was yet. The sound was odd in the quiet village square. Her heart flickered with a strange hope, a tiny spark that perhaps someone might come to change what was about to happen. But the spark was small, and the fire of fear around her still roared. She tried to remember all the stories her grandmother had told her about brave women in the village, about how courage could appear even in the darkest moments. Lila clutched her small hands together, trying to summon strength. She did not want to die. She did not want her life to end here, tied to a post in front of people who thought tradition mattered more than kindness. The elders of the village stepped forward. They were the oldest men and women, the keepers of customs. Their faces were lined with age, and their eyes were sharp with authority. One of them, a man with a long white beard and a voice that seemed to shake the air itself, began to speak. He explained the ritual, his words slow and deliberate. To him, this was not cruelty. To him, it was honor. Lila's stomach turned. Honor, she realized, was not about love or protection. It was about control. It was about fear. And she had been caught in its grasp. She looked at the firewood again, feeling her pulse racing faster than ever. She had to think. She had to find a way out. But there was no one she could call. No one she could turn to. Time passed slowly. Every second stretched like an endless thread, weaving tension tighter around her chest. The villagers chanted softly, a rhythmic hum that was meant to calm the ritual. But it only made Lila's heart beat faster. Her mind wandered to her younger brother, who was probably still asleep at home, unaware of the danger she faced. She thought of her friends, her teachers, the animals she cared for in the village. Her life was full of small joys, small moments, and she did not want them to end here. A small breeze blew through the square, rustling the leaves of the few trees that grew at the edges. Lila closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She tried to calm herself, to focus on anything but the fear that threatened to swallow her. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3, hoping each number would give her courage, hoping each number would make the world stop for just a moment, just enough for something unexpected to happen. She opened her eyes and looked around. Some villagers avoided her gaze, their expressions unreadable. Others watched closely, perhaps curious, perhaps cruel. But Lila noticed a few people who seemed uneasy, as if they did not fully agree with what was happening. Their discomfort gave her a small measure of hope. Maybe, she thought, not everyone believed in this cruel tradition. The firewood was lit. The flames began to flicker and grow, sending smoke curling into the sky. Lila's heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She could feel the heat on her skin, and panic threatened to overwhelm her. But in that moment, she noticed something strange, a commotion at the edge of the square. A figure was approaching, moving with unsteady steps, carrying something in his hand. He seemed different from anyone she had seen before in the village. His clothes were messy, and his hair stuck out in all directions. He smelled of alcohol, and his movements were unpredictable. Yet there was something in his presence that made Lila's heart skip. This stranger, this drunken man, seemed unaware of the rules and customs that bound everyone else. He moved with a freedom that frightened and intrigued her at the same time. For the first time that day, Lila felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would interfere. Someone would stop the fire before it could consume her. She tightened her hands against the ropes, feeling their rough fibers bite into her skin. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could this stranger help her? Could he really make a difference? She did not know, but she held on to the hope anyway. It was all she had. The elders continued their chants. The fire grew brighter, and the villagers watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. But Lila's eyes never left the approaching figure. She did not understand why he had come, or what he would do, but she sensed that her fate might not be sealed yet. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, the heat from the flames pressing closer. But the presence of the stranger gave her a small, fragile courage. In that moment, Lila understood something important. Life, she realized, was fragile, but it could also be unexpected. Help could come from the most unlikely places, and even in a world bound by harsh rules and rigid traditions, there was still room for courage, for intervention, for change. She did not know what would happen next. She could not predict the actions of the stranger or the reactions of the villagers. But she knew one thing with certainty. She had to hold on to hope, no matter how small, no matter how fleeting. For in this small village, under the harsh sun and among people bound by fear, hope might be the only thing that could save her. And so, Lila waited, her heart trembling but alive, her eyes fixed on the figure moving closer, and her mind clinging to the fragile thread of possibility. The stranger stumbled through the dusty streets of the village, his boots kicking up small clouds of dirt with every uneven step. His clothes were worn and ragged, stained from days on the road. A leather hat sat crooked on his head, shadowing his eyes, but the gleam of something restless, something alive, shone from beneath it. He held a small bottle in one hand, swaying slightly, but there was a sharpness to his movement that suggested he was more aware than he appeared. The villagers, seeing him approach, whispered nervously among themselves. He was not from their town. They did not recognize him, and in a place where strangers were treated with suspicion, his arrival caused an immediate stir. Children peeked from behind doors and windows, hiding in curiosity and fear. The elders stopped their ritual preparations for a brief moment, their eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar figure. Even the men, who had been standing rigid and serious, shifted slightly, unsure how to react to someone so obviously reckless. The stranger did not seem to notice their stares. He muttered to himself, sometimes laughing at invisible jokes, sometimes mumbling fragments of words that made no sense. Yet, despite his apparent drunkenness, he was moving toward the center of the village square, where a terrifying scene was unfolding. Lila, tied to the wooden post, looked up at him, her heart leaping in sudden, fragile hope. The stranger's presence was chaotic, unpredictable, yet it was exactly what she needed. As he drew closer, his eyes took in the scene with a sharpness that contradicted his staggering gait. He saw the pile of wood stacked neatly around the post, the small flames already beginning to flicker, and the fear etched deeply into the young woman's face. Something stirred within him, a sudden clarity, a sense of urgency that made him stumble forward more quickly than before. He didn't know why, but he felt that he could not walk away. The villagers noticed the change in his pace and began to murmur louder. Some of the older men grumbled about the troublemaker, about how strangers never brought anything good. But the younger men, those already uneasy about the ritual, felt a spark of curiosity. Perhaps they, too, sensed that the situation might be different now, that this man, reckless as he appeared, might disrupt the rigid order they had grown used to following blindly. The stranger stopped a few steps from the post. He swayed slightly, his hat tipping forward, but his eyes were fixed on Lila. She stared back, frozen with fear and hope at the same time. Her mind raced. Who was he? Why was he here? Could he really help her? The questions tumbled through her mind faster than she could answer them, but she clung to the thought that maybe, just maybe, she would not be left alone to face the fire. The man's hand moved toward the small pistol at his side. It was a worn, old firearm, one that had seen better days. He pulled it out carefully, holding it loosely, his fingers wrapped around it as if it were a lifeline. He looked at the flames, then at the villagers, and back at Lila. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He knew he could not stand by and watch a life be destroyed. Not if he could do something, even if he was drunk, even if he was unprepared. The villagers noticed him raising the pistol and gasped in surprise. Some laughed nervously, thinking he was just another fool wandering through their village. Others stepped back, sensing the danger in having a loaded gun in the hands of someone unpredictable. The elders, who had been chanting softly, now stopped, their voices trembling with confusion and authority. They had never faced this before, a stranger interfering in their traditions. Lila's eyes widened. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the man could hear it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, though she had barely dared to hope. The stranger's arrival, his boldness, and the sheer unpredictability of his actions were like a sudden gust of wind that could blow away the smoke and fear surrounding her. She could almost feel the chains of dread loosening. Even if only slightly, the man staggered closer, his boots scraping against the stones of the square. He raised the pistol higher, and then, without warning, he fired it into the air. The loud crack echoed through the village, causing birds to scatter from the trees and villagers to duck instinctively. The sudden sound was shocking, powerful, and chaotic, cutting through the tension like lightning. Flames seemed to flicker in response, as if the fire itself paused at the noise. A hush fell over the crowd. No one moved for a moment, unsure what to do. Lila's eyes welled with tears of relief. She had survived the first act of the ritual. The sound of the gunshot gave her a chance, a pause, a moment to breathe and hope. The stranger, still swaying slightly, shouted at the villagers, his voice rough but commanding, "Step back! Let her go!" The villagers froze. The words, coming from someone so unexpected, shook the authority of the elders. They had never been challenged like this, not by a stranger, and certainly not by someone who appeared so unsteady. Some of the younger men looked at each other, uncertain. Could they really continue this tradition when someone from outside had intervened so boldly? The question hung in the air, heavy and confusing. The stranger's words grew louder, more insistent, and he waved his pistol in the air, not at anyone, but to emphasize his demand. He seemed drunk, yes, but there was a fire in his eyes that made it clear he would not back down. Lila, still tied to the post, could hardly believe what was happening. The fear that had pressed so heavily on her chest only moments ago began to ease, replaced by a cautious hope. The elders stepped forward, their voices shaky. "What do you think you are doing?" one of them demanded. "This is our tradition. You cannot." "Stop it!" the stranger shouted over them, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Step back. Don't touch her. She is not yours to hurt." For the first time, some villagers hesitated. They had always followed orders without question, had always accepted the rituals without doubt. But now, faced with someone who openly defied the rules, they felt a flicker of fear. Not just of the gun, but of the idea that perhaps what they were doing was wrong. Lila's mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed the words, "Thank you," though the man could not hear her. She had seen the desperation in her daughter's eyes, and now, for the first time, she felt that maybe her child would live. The relief was overwhelming, mixing with her fear, creating a strange, painful beauty. The stranger took a few more steps forward, keeping the pistol raised. He shouted again, warning the villagers not to move closer. His words were slurred at times, but the meaning was clear. He was unpredictable, loud, and commanding all at once. And in that chaos, Lila found hope. The hope that she would not be left to the fire. The villagers began to step back, unsure what to do. Some muttered under their breath about the foolishness of the man, about the disrespect to tradition. But no one moved forward. The fire, which had begun to crackle, now seemed less threatening with the distance created by the stranger's intervention. Lila could feel her hands trembling. But not from fear alone, there was also relief, awe, and the strange thrill of seeing life take an unexpected turn. The stranger looked directly at Lila, giving her a small, encouraging nod. Even in his drunken state, there was a clarity in that gesture. He had seen her, truly seen her, and he had acted. That recognition, that simple human acknowledgement, filled her with a courage she had never known she possessed. She straightened her back slightly, lifted her chin, and drew in a deep breath. The elders exchanged nervous glances. They were faced with a choice they had never imagined: continue the ritual and face the wrath of someone willing to challenge them openly, or pause, reconsider, and perhaps allow the young woman to live. The tension in the square was almost unbearable, a silent battle of wills between tradition and the unexpected. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Lila, still tied to the post, watched the stranger, feeling a strange mixture of fear, hope, and gratitude. She did not know what would happen next, but for the first time that day, she felt that her life was not entirely in the hands of others. She had a chance, a fragile, uncertain chance, And that was enough. The stranger took one final step forward and fired the pistol into the air again, louder this time, making the villagers jump back further. The sound was deafening, echoing through the narrow streets, leaving an impression that would linger for years. Some of the younger men began to murmur among themselves, questioning the ritual for the first time. The elders, though hesitant, realized that their control was slipping, if only slightly. Lila's heart swelled with hope. She could feel the warmth of possibility, the sense that she might survive the day, that she might escape the fire and live to see another sunrise. The stranger, staggering but resolute, had changed everything. The oppressive weight of tradition, the fear that had seemed insurmountable, was no longer absolute. In that moment, the small village square, once a place of fear and rigid control, became a place of possibility. A place where courage, even from the most unlikely person, could make a difference. Lila closed her eyes for a moment, silently thanking the man who had stepped into her life at exactly the right time. And though she did not yet know how the day would end, she understood something vital. Hope could arrive in the strangest of forms, and sometimes, it only took one person to stand against the tide, to change everything. The village square was silent, except for the soft crackle of the firewood and the occasional gasp from a woman in the crowd. Lila's heart pounded faster than it ever had. The stranger, the drunken cowboy, as the villagers had begun to whisper, stood a few steps away, pistol in hand, swaying slightly but undeniably focused. The tension in the air was thick, like a heavy blanket pressing down on everyone. Yet somehow, in the midst of it all, there was a strange energy building. Something was about to change. The cowboy took a step closer, his boots scraping the stones, and pointed his gun into the air once more. The loud crack echoed across the square, startling both humans and animals alike. Birds took flight from nearby trees, cawing in fear. Some villagers flinched, stepping back instinctively, as the sound shattered the tense rhythm of the ritual. Even the elders, who had always commanded respect, seemed momentarily unsure of how to respond. "Step back," the cowboy shouted, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Do not touch her. She belongs to no one but herself." For a moment, there was total silence. The villagers froze, unsure whether to obey or confront the man. Some of them whispered to each other, their faces pale. They had never seen anyone act so boldly, so recklessly. It was one thing to challenge words, another to challenge tradition in front of the entire village. Lila felt a flicker of courage rise inside her. She had been paralyzed with fear, tied to the post, helpless. Now, she could feel hope, a wild, fragile hope, but hope, nonetheless. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her shaking hands. The fire no longer felt as close, not because it had grown smaller, but because the cowboy had created space between her and the flames. The elders gathered themselves, their faces stern but tinged with confusion. One of them, the man with the long white beard who had spoken so authoritatively before, stepped forward. His voice quivered slightly as he said, "Who are you to interfere with the ways of our village? You do not understand our traditions." The cowboy laughed, a rough, unexpected sound that rang out over the square. "Traditions? Honor? You call this honor?" he said, pointing to Lila, tied to the post. "This is cruelty, and I will not let it happen." Some of the villagers gasped at his words, and a few younger men exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, doubt crept into their minds. They had followed the elders' orders without question. But now, faced with someone willing to challenge everything, they hesitated. The fire, the ritual, the strict rules, it all seemed suddenly fragile. The cowboy stepped closer again, swaying slightly but with purpose. "I said, step back," he shouted, his voice shaking with urgency. "Let her go." A few villagers muttered among themselves, whispering words of caution and fear. "Who does he think he is?" one said. "He's just a stranger. Let him be." but no one moved forward. The combination of the gun, the sudden chaos, and the cowboys' undeniable determination had frozen them. Lila could feel the ropes pressing against her wrists, but her fear had begun to melt into relief. Perhaps, just perhaps, she would live. The cowboy's eyes locked onto Lila's. He nodded slightly, a small gesture that seemed to say, "Hold on, I will help you." That simple acknowledgement, a stranger willing to stand against danger for her sake, filled her with courage. She took a deep breath and tried to still her trembling body, knowing that the next moments could decide her fate. "Release her!" the cowboy shouted again, louder this time, firing the pistol into the air once more. The sound was deafening, making the villagers flinch back in shock. Some covered their ears, others stared at him, stunned by the audacity of his actions. The firewood, stacked and ready, now seemed less threatening. Fear and confusion had taken the place of certainty, and the square was filled with the tension of uncertainty. The elders spoke urgently among themselves, their voices low but sharp. They were unsure what to do: continue with the ritual and risk angering this unpredictable stranger, or pause and reconsider, questioning the very tradition they had upheld all their lives. Their hesitation gave the cowboy exactly what he needed. He moved forward again, stepping carefully but steadily. His eyes never left Lila. "Step aside," he said to the villagers, his voice commanding despite the slight slur in his words. "She is not yours to harm. Do you understand me?" Some of the villagers began to murmur. The first real murmurs of doubt and fear. They had always obeyed without question. But now, faced with someone so bold and dangerous, they hesitated. The younger men looked at each other, unsure, while the elders grew increasingly tense. Their authority, once absolute, was suddenly fragile. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. The fire was still there, flames licking the edges of the wood, but the distance created by the cowboy's intervention made it seem less immediate. She could feel her hope rising. Fragile but real, she had survived the first wave of danger, and now there was a chance for freedom. The cowboy raised the pistol again, pointing it into the air to maintain control over the crowd. "I said, step back," he shouted, his voice echoing through the square. "Do not touch her, or you will regret it." A few villagers whispered urgently to each other, trying to understand what was happening. "He's mad," one said. "But what if he's right?" The cowboy's gaze swept over the crowd, landing on those who seemed uncertain. "Listen to me," he shouted. "This young woman does not belong to anyone but herself. You have no right to harm her. Step back now." For a moment, it seemed as if the village had paused entirely. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled, the smoke rising into the sky. But the danger that had seemed so certain now wavered. The cowboy, staggering slightly, had taken control of the situation, not through order, but through sheer unpredictability and courage. Lila's mother stepped forward cautiously, tears streaming down her face. She could not speak, but her eyes conveyed everything: fear, relief, gratitude. She knew her daughter might survive this day because of the stranger who had appeared seemingly from nowhere, drunk and chaotic, yet unyielding. The elders finally spoke, their voices trembling. This is not the way," one of them said. Perhaps we should reconsider." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "Reconsider? You should have thought of that before you tied her to a post and lit the fire. Now, step aside." The villagers began to obey, hesitating at first, but then slowly stepping back from the post. Some muttered under their breath about tradition and honor, but the fear in their eyes was clear. The man had disrupted their authority in a way they had never imagined. Lila's hands shook, but she felt the ropes loosen slightly as some of the younger men, perhaps out of fear or respect for the stranger, began to untie her. Her heart soared with relief. The fire was no longer an immediate threat. She could breathe again, feel the warmth of hope replacing the cold grip of fear. The cowboy lowered his pistol slightly but kept it ready, his eyes scanning the crowd to ensure no one made a sudden move. His presence, chaotic as it was, had brought order in an unexpected way. He had stopped the ritual without fighting, without negotiating, simply through courage and unpredictability. Lila stood, her body trembling, as the ropes fell away. She rubbed her wrists, feeling the roughness of the rope against her skin, but more importantly, feeling that she was free. For the first time that day, she could move without restriction. The fire, though still burning, now seemed distant, powerless against the wave of relief washing over her. The villagers continued to step back, their faces a mixture of fear, confusion, and curiosity. Some had never seen such bravery. Some had never imagined that a single person could defy the entire village and succeed. The elders looked at each other, realizing that the rules they had followed blindly might not be absolute after all. The cowboy, swaying slightly but steady, gave Lila a small nod. It was a gesture of reassurance, a silent promise that she was safe, at least for now. Lila's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of gratitude. She had survived. She had been seen, truly seen, by someone who had risked everything to stand for what was right. The fire continued to burn, but its danger had diminished. The village had been changed, even if only slightly. Doubt had entered hearts that had never questioned. Hope had touched a life that had never felt safe, and courage had come from the most unexpected place. In that moment, Lila understood something profound. Life could be terrifying. Traditions could be cruel. But bravery, even in the form of a messy, unpredictable, drunken cowboy, could make a difference. Sometimes, it only took one person, willing to act, to change the course of a day, a life, perhaps even an entire community. As the square settled into an uneasy calm, Lila's mother embraced her, holding her close, whispering words of relief and love. The villagers, still murmuring, began to disperse slowly, each step away from the post a small step toward reconsidering the traditions they had followed without question. Lila looked at the cowboy one last time. He gave a small wave, almost casual, and began to stagger away, disappearing down the road as unpredictably as he had arrived. She watched him go, understanding that some heroes came and went like the wind, sudden, chaotic, but unforgettable. For Lila, the world had shifted. Fear still lingered, as it always would, but hope now burned brighter. Courage could appear in unexpected forms, and sometimes, even the most fragile chance could become a turning point. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the village square. Lila, finally free from the post, took a deep breath and stepped forward into the uncertain but promising future, her heart alive with relief, gratitude, and a newfound sense of strength. The village square was quieter now, though the fire still burned, crackling softly as the smoke rose into the sky. The chaos that had filled the morning had shifted into something more subdued, though tension still lingered like a shadow. Lila stood with her mother by her side, her wrists free from the rough ropes that had bound her. Her body still trembled, partly from fear, partly from relief, and partly from the rush of emotions that had built up in the past hours. She felt as though she had survived not just a ritual, but a lifetime of worry and despair. The villagers began to disperse slowly, their whispers filling the air. Some spoke of what had happened in awe, some in fear, and others in shame. The elders, who had once held unquestioned authority over every aspect of life in the village, gathered at the edge of the square. Their faces were tight with worry and confusion. For the first time, they had seen someone challenge their traditions and succeed. It was a humbling, almost frightening experience. Lila's father approached cautiously, his eyes softened with worry and love. He had always believed in the importance of honor, but now he looked at his daughter and saw something he had overlooked before: her humanity, her right to live freely, and the strength that had been inside her all along. He embraced her, holding her tightly, as if trying to make up for the fear and danger she had endured. "You are safe," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are safe now." Lila clung to him, her own tears flowing freely. Relief mingled with gratitude, and a lingering shock. She had survived a moment that could have ended her life. And she had been rescued by someone she barely knew. A stranger who had appeared like a force of nature. Untamed and unpredictable, yet courageous beyond measure. She would never forget him, even if she never saw him again. The village began to stir with small, tentative actions. People who had been silent before now started questioning. Softly, carefully. Was it really right to do this? One woman whispered to another. I am not sure anymore, another replied. It was the first time some of them had dared to challenge the rituals they had followed for years. The idea that a single person could disrupt such deeply ingrained traditions was both frightening and inspiring. Lila's mother gathered her daughters and the younger women in a small circle nearby, speaking in hushed tones. She told them to remember what had happened, to understand that courage could come in unexpected forms, and that it was possible to act against injustice, even in the face of fear. Lila listened closely, absorbing every word, realizing that this day was not just about her survival, but about the possibility of change for everyone. Meanwhile, the cowboy whose presence had been the catalyst for this moment was already moving away. He walked down the narrow paths of the village, swaying slightly but still upright, leaving behind the echoes of gunfire and courage. People watched him go, some fascinated, some incredulous. Children, peeking from behind doors, whispered his name with awe. He had come, he had acted, and he had disappeared almost as quickly as he had arrived. Though he was gone, the impact of his actions remained. Lila felt it in her chest, a warmth that spread like sunlight through her fear. She had been given a chance, a gift of life that she could now use to shape her future. She looked at the villagers, some ashamed, some thoughtful, and some quietly smiling, and realized that even in this small, rigid place, change could begin. Her father stepped forward again, this time speaking to the remaining villagers. His voice was steady, though heavy with emotion. "We have followed traditions blindly for many years," he said, "but today we have learned something important. Life is precious, and it cannot be bound by fear. Let us remember this day, and let us act with compassion from now on." The villagers listened, their expressions shifting from hesitation to reflection. Some nodded quietly. Others remained silent, deep in thought. For many, this day marked the beginning of a new understanding. The customs they had held as absolute were now subject to examination, and the possibility of change, though small, had been planted in their minds. Lila and her mother began walking toward their home, her small steps cautious but filled with a newfound confidence. The weight of fear that had pressed upon her all morning began to lift. She breathed deeply, inhaling the crisp air, feeling that she was stepping into a world that, while still unpredictable, had become more alive, more hopeful. As they walked, Lila thought about the stranger who had saved her. She had no way of knowing his name, where he had come from, or where he was going next, but she understood something essential about him. Bravery could appear in the most unlikely forms. It did not require perfect plans or calm minds. Sometimes it only required the courage to act, even when fear and uncertainty were overwhelming. Her mother held her hand tightly, squeezing it gently. "He saved you," she whispered. "A stranger, and yet, he saved you. Remember that. Courage can come from anywhere, and even the smallest act can make a difference." Lila nodded, the words echoing in her heart. She had experienced fear, terror, and desperation, but she had also witnessed bravery, hope, and kindness in the unlikeliest of forms. That understanding would stay with her forever. In the days that followed, the village slowly returned to its routines, but the memory of that morning lingered. The elders, once unchallenged, began to consider their actions more carefully. The younger men and women spoke quietly about what had happened, sharing their feelings and doubts. Even the children, who had only witnessed the event from behind walls and doors, carried a sense of awe and possibility. The story of the cowboy, the fire, and the bride's survival spread quietly, planting the seed of change in hearts that had long been closed to doubt. Lila, meanwhile, found herself growing stronger each day. Her experience had changed her, not just because she had survived, but because she had learned that life could shift in an instant. Courage could arrive unexpectedly, and hope could appear even in the darkest moments. She began to take small steps toward independence, learning to trust her instincts, and understanding that the world, while sometimes cruel, could also hold unexpected kindness. Her father supported her quietly, helping her navigate the days after the ritual, teaching her that life was precious and that she had the right to live it fully. Her mother remained a constant source of love and guidance, reminding her that she was brave and capable, and that she had a future worth protecting. The villagers, slowly but surely, began to question more openly. Some traditions that had been followed blindly for generations were reconsidered. Decisions that had once been dictated by fear and habit began to include thought, compassion, and reflection. Though change was slow, the events of that day had started a ripple that could not easily be stopped. Lila often thought of the cowboy, imagining him on some distant road, moving from place to place, changing lives in small, chaotic ways. She hoped he was safe, and she was grateful for his courage. In her heart, she knew that the lesson he had brought was not just about survival, but about the power of action. The idea that one person, even an unlikely one, could make a difference when it mattered most. As weeks turned into months, Lila rebuilt her life. She helped her family, cared for her home, and spoke quietly with her friends about the importance of courage and hope. She never forgot the morning of the ritual, the fear, the fire, or the man who had appeared to save her. The memory was etched into her mind, a constant reminder that life could be both fragile and strong, terrifying and beautiful, all at once. Her village, too, began to shift in small ways. People became more willing to question traditions that seemed cruel or unnecessary. They spoke more openly with one another and began to act with a little more kindness, a little more thoughtfulness. The memory of the day, and of the cowboy's intervention, became a quiet legend, a story told in whispers, teaching the next generation about bravery, hope, and the possibility of change. Lila often stood by the edge of the village at sunset, looking out over the hills and fields, feeling the wind on her face. She felt alive, fully alive, and aware that life could be unpredictable, yet she also knew that courage, hope, and compassion could arrive in the most unlikely ways. And she carried that lesson with her, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The fire that had once threatened to take her life now existed only in memory. It was a symbol of the danger that had passed and the new life that had begun. Lila had survived, and in surviving, she had learned something profound. No matter how rigid the world might seem, there was always room for hope, for bravery, and for change. And though the cowboy had disappeared, leaving only footprints and echoes, his impact remained. He had reminded everyone that sometimes it only takes one person to act, one unexpected hero to change the course of events, and that courage could appear in the most surprising forms. Lila's heart was full of gratitude, her spirit alive with newfound strength. She knew that her life had been forever changed by that day, and she understood that the world, though often harsh, could also hold the promise of kindness, courage, and hope. And in that promise, she found the beginning of her true freedom.